Okay, this is 10.8, Right Triangle Trigonometry, the Pythagorean Theorem. This is part 1. So Pythagorean Theorem, and I don't know why it printed out like this, is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. A and b are called legs, and c is the length of the hypotenuse. So the length of side A, I'm going to make that yellow. The length of side B, I'm going to make that pink. And by the way, A and B are called legs. So this is leg A and leg B. And I know that because the legs will compose that right angle. Okay, so the legs, the length of the legs compose a right angle, and the side across from the right angle is called the hypotenuse, which I'm going to make green, which we're going to call that C. So if I take the length of side A and square it, plus the length of side B and square it, I get the hypotenuse squared. Okay, so we're going to label the sides of the following triangles: hypotenuse, leg, leg. I'm going to let H equal hypotenuse, and I'm going to let L equal leg. Okay, so if I look at the first triangle here, again, the legs are the ones, the lengths of them are compose that right angle, and the hypotenuse is always across from that right angle, and it's the longest side, okay? So in the second triangle, again, we have this right triangle here, so I know this is a leg, and then this side is also a leg, and the side across from that right angle is the hypotenuse. And finally, in the third triangle, the two sides that compose the right triangle are the legs, and the side across from the right triangle is called the hypotenuse. Okay? Use the Pythagorean theorem to find the length of the hypotenuse. Okay, so remember that the Pythagorean theorem says we have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So again, the legs a and b are going to be set equal to c. Okay, so I'm going to let a equal 6. So I'm going to put 6 in there for a. And I'm going to let 8 equal b. So I'm going to plug 8 in for b. And c is what we're trying to find. So I'm going to leave that alone. So 6 squared is 36 plus 8 squared, which is 64. And that's equal to c squared. So this equals 100. 36 plus 64. Now, in order to solve something squared, the opposite operation of it is to take the square root of it. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So what I get here is I get the square root of c squared, which is just c, equals plus or minus 100, or the square root of 100, which is 10. The square root of 100 is 10. Now, because I'm talking about length, I'm going to ignore the negative 10 because that doesn't make sense. So the length of side C is 10. So I just wanted to let you know, when you use the square root property, basically when you're taking the square root of something squared, I get two answers, plus or minus, but in this case, I will only include the positive result. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this next one. Use the Pythagorean theorem to find the length of the missing side. Okay, so the legs are 5, so I'm going to call that A. And the other leg I don't know, so I'm going to just let that's B. And the side across from the right angle is the hypotenuse, so that's going to be C. So again, I use Pythagorean to find the missing length of the side. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And now I plug and play. So where I see a, I'm going to plug in 5. So I get 5 squared plus, I don't know what b is, so I'm leaving b squared alone. And I do know what the length of c is, it's 13. I'm going to square that. So 5 squared is 25 plus b squared equals. Now I think 13 squared is 169, but I'm going to double check that. Yeah, it's 169. Okay, so I need to isolate b. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm going to take and subtract off the 25 and move it to the other side. And when I do that, I get 144. So b squared equals 144. Now, again, to get rid of something squared, I have to do the opposite operation, which is to take the square root. And when I use the square root property, and that's what I'm using right now, remember I have plus or minus answers. I have one answer is plus, one's minus. So the square root of b squared is just b, and I get plus or minus 144. The square root of 144 is 12. So again, I don't need a negative answer because we're talking about the length of a side. So the answer to this is going to be 12. Okay, let's do this next one. Invaders climb a castle wall with a 25-foot ladder. Assuming that the wall of the castle is perfectly perpendicular to the ground, the top of the ladder is at the top of the wall. The base of the ladder is 10 feet from the castle wall. How tall is the castle wall? All right, we're going to draw a picture here. So here's the castle wall. So, we have some invaders trying to take the castle over. So we have a ladder here, So we're looking at the ladder from the side, so we don't see too much of it. Okay. And then this ladder is propped up against there, but it makes a right triangle here. So make the ladder a little bit longer. Okay. So here's what this looks like. So the length of the ladder is 25 foot. So let's go ahead and put that in there. And I know that it's 10 feet from the castle wall on the ground, right? So I know the length of this. But what I don't know is the height of the castle. So I'm going to let that equal x. So if I redraw this triangle, I have this situation going on. I have 10 here, x here, and 25. So again, I'm using Pythagorean. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So I'm going to call this side a. So 10 squared because it's a leg. The unknown is going to be x, or you can leave it as b if you want. And then c is a hypotenuse. Remember, that's the side across from the right angle, which is 25. Remember, I'm squaring that. Okay? So 10 squared is 100 plus x squared, and 25 squared, I believe, is 625, but I'm going to double check. And it is. So to get x squared by itself, because I want to isolate x, I'm going to subtract 100 off of both sides. So I get x squared equals 525. Now again, to get rid of something squared, I have to use the square root property. So what I do to one side, I have to do the other. And don't forget, this answer is actually plus or minus. So now I need to know what the square root of 125 is. Or 525. So 525, take the square root of that. And when I do that, I get x equals plus or minus 22.9. And I'm just rounding to the hundredths place. So remember, we're going to have to round to the nearest foot. Okay, so I took it out to the tenths place, sorry. All right. So remember, I only want to keep the positive values. So 22.9, round to the nearest foot. So if I round to the nearest foot, I'm looking at the 9. It is larger than 5, so I'm going to round up the 22. So 23 feet would be the height of the castle wall. Okay, one more. Randy wants to attach a 17-foot string of lights to the top of the 15-foot mast of his sailboat. How far from the base of the mast should he attach the lights to the string? So you already have a diagram with this one. I'm going to draw this out again. Okay, so 15 feet, 17 feet, we want to know how far from the base. Okay, so if I use Pythagorean, I'm going to let A equal 15, B equal the unknown side, and C is the hypotenuse, which is across from that right angle. So again, use Pythagorean. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. A is 15 plus B, we don't know, and the hypotenuse is 17 squared. Okay, so let's figure out what we got here. So we're going to have to do 15 squared. And that's 225. Plus B squared equals, now I need 17 squared. And that's 289. Now, I have to get B squared by itself, so we're going to isolate B. So I'm going to subtract off 225 from this side. So B squared equals 64. Okay, so my last step is to get B by itself. So I'm going to use the square root property. So I'm going to take the square root of B squared. And what I do to one side, I have to do the other. So square root of 64. So I get B equals plus or minus 8. Again, we're talking about length. So the answer to this would be positive 8 feet. And that's it for that section. Thank you for watching, and start your homework.